I had two unmedicated natural births, but they couldn't be more different. My first was this beautiful, calm water birth that made me feel empowered. My second birth was fast and intense. I went from walking into the hospital to holding my baby in just 35 minutes. Today, I'm going to share both experiences, compare the differences, and answer your questions about unmedicated births. Speaking of my two little ones, I want to thank KiwiCo for partnering up with me for this video. We've been using their panda crates for almost 3 years now, and it's been amazing for my family and kids. Like right now, Desmond uses their Let's Bond crate designed for 0 to 2 months. It comes with this perfect tummy time pillow and play mat, which we use daily. Plus, there's this super helpful guide for parents that explains your baby's development and gives you different ways to play with them as they grow. Lila's been really into her colorful chemistry box, which encourages her to experiment and get creative. The whole family gets really excited when a new crate arrives every 2 months because that means more activities, more fun and games, and lots of learning. As a busy parent, I love that KiwiCo makes it easier for me to make playtime fun and engaging, and it gives me peace of mind because I know everything is research backed and designed to grow with my kids. Each panda crate comes with age appropriate activities that help develop your baby's skill through play. You can actually preview all the crates from 0 to 36 months before purchasing, so you know exactly what you're getting for each stage. If you want to try KiwiCo for your little ones, you can get 20% off your first panda crate using code Yong, or you can click the link in my description box below. Now let me take you through my first birth with Lila in Singapore. I do have a whole birth vlog that you guys can watch, but just to recap, my water broke at 2 a.m. and I felt calm, collected. We basically labored at home for the early hours. Doula came over. My mental state I would describe as like calm, collected, obviously a little bit nervous, but I felt like I had the support I needed. And because I was at home, I was just naturally more relaxed. So we did a bunch of different exercises to help baby move down, as well as help with the pain management throughout the contractions. My doula gave me a TENS machine to use, which sort of like vibrates and sends these little shocks onto my back to help distract my brain from focusing on the contraction pains. When we arrived at the hospital, we were able to just set up the room how I wanted. So I specifically said in my birth plan, I wanted the room dark, minimal disturbances. We put like birth affirmations and soothing music on. Alf even like had like these little tea light candles just to really set the mood and make it not feel so like a hospital environment. I had my eye shades on. I was just trying to like breathe and focus on relaxing my body, breathing through the surges and allowing my body just to open up. And within 2 hours, I went from 3 centimeters to fully dilated. That's when I got into the tub and labored for a little bit. The water made things feel a little bit more calm. Obviously, the contractions still were painful, but I feel like I was in a really good mental state, just focusing on listening to my body. Then when it was time to push, I just pushed however I wanted to. And within like a couple of pushes, baby was out. I'll never forget the feeling afterwards holding Lila in my hands. It was like a mixture of emotions. I felt like, oh my God, relieved, and then also so empowered. I was like, oh my God, I just did this. I'm a warrior. I can take on anything. Like everything in my life before was nothing compared to this. Basically, I felt like I could conquer anything in this world. I ended up getting just 1 stitch, which made healing a lot easier. And I felt like that birth was such an amazing birth experience because I was supported. Basically everything I wanted in my birth plan, like it happened, you know what I mean? Like it was just almost the perfect birth. But when I had my second, things were very, very, very different. So number one, I actually gave birth in Vietnam, so a whole new country, a whole new health system. And here in Vietnam, they do not have water births. That simply wasn't available. And so I opted just for a normal vaginal natural birth. Also, being in my second birth, I was already dilated weeks before I actually went into labor. So I was about 3 centimeters dilated for about a week and a half. And when my water broke at home, I didn't have much time to labor at home because things just progressed really quickly. I basically probably stayed home for an hour, waited for my doula to come, and then we got a cab to the hospital, which was like 10 minutes away. That part wasn't so bad. It was when I got to the hospital that I felt like things started going downhill. When I arrived, I was told to sit in a wheelchair, which if any mamas out there, if you've had a baby and you're going through like, you know, your contractions and you're laboring, you would know that sitting down down is like the worst position. Like it is so uncomfortable to go through a contraction when you're sitting down and things are just like, you know, getting pushed down. Sitting is just the worst. But I was made to sit in a wheelchair. I had to be measured up. It was a male nurse and I felt like maybe he just didn't understand what contractions would feel like. And so when I would be mid-contraction, he'd be asking me all these details and I just felt like, oh my God, like just let me be for a sec, like don't overwhelm me. Not only that, Alfred had to stay downstairs to do a bunch of paperwork, even though we had pre-registered and booked the package at the hospital, made a deposit and everything. So it's very different to Singapore, because in Singapore, we just basically went straight up to the delivery room. Alfred was with me all the time. My doula was with me all the time. But in Vietnam, the system is different. So I had to separate from Alfred. We went up with the doula. I got wheeled up, even though I specifically asked if I could just walk to the room like how I did in Singapore. In Singapore, I was offered the wheelchair, but they didn't make me use it because I didn't want to. But I get it, like in Vietnam, maybe they just have that protocol to prevent falls, and it was just probably a hospital policy that patients had to be wheeled up. So yeah, and I think like that just made things a lot more stressful for me from the start, and that really affected like my mental capacity to just stay calm and collected and focus on breathing through my contractions. I started feeling anxious, I started feeling stressed, I felt like the fear creep in. When we got upstairs, my doula had to wait outside, and so for a little while I was alone, which is like the worst. Like you're going through this crazy moment, like I'm feeling my contractions, I'm in this new environment, my support team is out there somewhere, and so that like anxiety really like intensified. When the nurses checked me, I was 4 centimeters and I had to stay laying down on the bed because they were going to monitor baby's heart rate. The hospital here didn't have one of those cordless monitors that I could like stand up and, you know, labor and get comfortable in my positions. I had to lay down, and again, it's just like one of the worst positions to be in, like when you are facing your contractions and baby is moving down. But I did it anyway, and I kind of went through it. On top of that, as I'm going through my contractions, the nurses, the doctors asked me if I want to use pain reliever, aka epidural, even though I had specifically written in my birth plan that I don't want it. So usually when you say you don't want it, the nurses or the staff would know not to offer it, because imagine like you're in this vulnerable state, you're hurting, it's like so painful, and then someone offers you this like option, like a way out. It's so like tempting just to say yes in that moment, even though you step back in the bigger picture, you really didn't want to in the first place. It's so hard to advocate for yourself, and I felt that in that moment. And I get like maybe the staff just thought, oh my God, this girl is like screaming through her contractions, she must be in so much pain, like let's just offer her like the epidural. I understand that part, but I think like it really messed up my head in that moment, because as soon as they asked me, even though I said no to them, I had like these like 2 voices in my head. One was saying like, oh my God, it's hurting so much, Tina, just take the epidural. And the other one was like, no, you could do this, you know, you've done it before. And it was just like this mental battle I had in my head, and it felt like chaotic. I couldn't be calm and collected like the first birth. Another thing that was really hard was because the staff was speaking Vietnamese to me, my doula couldn't speak up for me, and Alfred, when he got there, he couldn't really speak up because they don't speak Vietnamese. And so I felt like it was really hard to just advocate for myself in that moment, like mid-contraction, saying no to an epidural, or saying like I'm not ready to push, things like that I didn't have to necessarily do with my first, made this birth experience so much more challenging for me. On top of all that chaos, I happened to open up very quickly. When they checked me at first, I was 4 centimeters, and probably like a couple contractions later, I could feel my body changing. I could feel like, oh, baby's coming out. I could feel my body bearing down, and I knew like, oh my God, like I'm about to give birth, even though it's like minutes after they checked me. So I ended up going from 4 centimeters to fully dilated 10 centimeters in 12 minutes. Can you just imagine that? That's like 3 songs. It was so intense, the pain, and having everyone around me with the bright lights and that environment, it was scary, it was intense, it was chaotic. And because everything happened so quick, I was still on the bed. Like I didn't even have a chance to get up and like labor or use any of like the equipment that I had. I had the TENS machine, I had all these other pain relieving techniques that I wanted to try, but that literally went out the window. The only thing that I was able to use was my comb, and even that I couldn't even really use because this hospital hospital ended up putting an IV cannula in one of my arms, just as a protocol that they had at this hospital. I didn't have that with my first, so it was kind of weird, but yeah, I was attached to this like IV, and so I couldn't hold the comb in that hand and like hold like my doula's hand. So like it was just really hard. Like I felt really restricted at that place. When it came time to push, I really didn't want to give birth on my back. It's like, again, one of the most uncomfortable positions, but I happened to be laying on the bed. I tried just like listening to my body, laboring on the side, but you know, my doctor was like, if you just lay back, you'll give birth really quickly. And in that moment, you just listen to like what your team says. And I ended up laying back. We went into that, you know, traditional birth position on your back like you see in the movies, the legs up and you just push. However, my doctor was really good in guiding me how to push. So he actually told me push when I'm not going through a contraction. So then I can actually control it, which will prevent tearing. And so I thought that was really different, but I'm glad I took his advice with that. And so I did push, and yeah, eventually baby's head came out, and then I birthed the rest of the body. And surprisingly, like crazy enough, I did not tear. But I remember like when I heard baby cry and he was placed on top of me, I just like burst into tears. It was like tears of joy, tears of like shock. I was just in disbelief about what happened. Literally, I felt like the last few minutes of my labor, I was just like out of body. A part of me didn't want to be in my body anymore because it was so chaotic. In my mind, it was just like a mess. And I just felt like I had left my body and just was on this like autopilot mode. And so when I held baby, I was just like, oh my God, like so overwhelmed. I felt like, what the heck just happened? It was just like a mix of emotions. After the whole birth experience, I felt like it was really difficult for me to process what actually happened. Even though I got the birth result that I wanted a natural unmedicated birth, I didn't want to tear, and I delivered baby safely. So I ended up getting what I wanted, but the experience was like completely different to what I expected. And I felt like that was really hard for me to process. And when I think about it, I almost feel like I have some birth trauma there. Like it's just so different to how I felt with Lila's birth. I felt like empowered, I could totally do this again, and yeah, I can take on the world. Whereas this one, I was just like, oh my God, I'm like scared to even like relive that. I was scared to even rewatch my like birth video, and going through the footage was so hard. Like I couldn't watch it without crying and tearing up. I don't want to like use the word traumatic so much because I feel like maybe that's just like a bit of an exaggeration, but there was like some like part of me, I felt really uncomfortable. I felt like it was just really challenging for me, and it was hard for me to even process afterwards. So even though I had 2 natural unmedicated births, the experience was so different. And I could say that if I had my second birth as my first birth experience, I probably wouldn't have another kid. Like that's how much it affected my mental state. Like even when I speak about it now, I feel like I choke up about it because it's like, oh, just reliving those moments. And it was just so hard. It was scary. It was just like chaotic. Now let me answer some of your most asked questions about unmedicated births. People want to know whether water birth or normal birth is more painful. Since I've experienced both, I will say that a water birth definitely hurts less than a regular bed birth, for me at least. Even though the bed birth was my second kid, I felt like it was a lot more painful. It could be because my mental state, I was in like a more stressed sort of state, whereas the water birth, I was more relaxed. Also, I felt like when you're doing a water birth, I think it's harder for someone to instruct you how to push, or you know, at least for me, I was just able to listen to my body. And with my bed birth, it was a lot more like, do this, breathe, like stop pushing. Like it was just more like instructional. So I felt like that was a challenge on its own. Next thing people want to know is, why didn't I go with an epidural for both of my births? Now, I did a lot of research, and you know, even though like epidurals are amazing because they just block out that pain, there are a lot of side effects, and a lot of the time when you go through one intervention, it could lead to a cascade of other interventions, and then maybe it might lead to like an emergency C-section. There's just like a lot of side effects. For example, it could lower your blood pressure, and then in turn lower baby's blood pressure, and then that's when like medical staff will sort of panic, and then you'll have to do something else, and it keeps cascading on. And then a lot of the time, yeah, some mums just end up having a C-section. I really didn't want to take that risk, and a part of me had this curiosity of finding out what birth was like, because my mum always told me, oh, birth is it's fine, it's easy, it's just like doing a big poop and having a stomach ache. And so I kind of grew up thinking that it would be easy, so I wasn't really ever scared of going through birth without like pain meds or anything. And because I was able to do it with my first, I definitely just wanted to continue with my second because it just made things a lot easier and there wasn't any complications. What was recovery like after each birth? I will say that the first birth, because I did tear a little bit, there was a little bit more aftercare down there, but that wasn't too bad. With the second birth, I definitely felt like my body was hit by a bus. It was just a lot more painful when it came to breastfeeding. So if you guys didn't know this, when you breastfeed, you actually feel contractions because your uterus is like shrinking back, and I felt it way more with my second. It almost felt like I was just reliving like my contractions every time I fed baby, and so that was really hard for me. I remember with my first birth, like in a couple of hours, I was able to like jump out of bed, go pee by myself and just be a completely normal human being. And with my second, I was like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. Like getting up out of the bed was so hard. Going to pee was a mission. I really needed Alfred there to support me. Maybe because it's my second birth and you know, your body has changed, or maybe because I'm older now, I just don't bounce back like how I did. With my second birth though, I did ask for a lot more help. I did seek a lot more help that was available. For example, I went to a postpartum center to do my confinement there for a few weeks. My first one, I just recovered at home and just thought I can just deal with everything myself. But being a second time around mum, I knew recovery was going to be really important. And so this time I got a lot more help. Did you poop yourself when you gave birth? Thankfully for both of my births, I did not poop myself, but I did do a number 2 before I went to the hospital. Like when you go through these contractions, especially the early ones, it just feels like a little bit of like a period cramp or like a stomach ache, and then you feel pressure there. And so I was able to release my bowels before, and yeah, I didn't poop myself whilst I was pushing. Thank God. Next question is, how did you give birth so quickly? I honestly think it's just like my body. I didn't really do anything special. Maybe the only thing I did was like eat dates like in the last couple of weeks of my pregnancy just to soften up the cervix. But I feel like it's just my body. Like some people have that thing where they just open up really quickly, and I ended up being that for my first and second. Also, my mum gave birth really quickly. I think I came out in like 15 minutes. So maybe it's just the genes. I'm not too sure. I don't know. Like, I think it's just, I don't know, fast birth genes. I will say that generally when you are more relaxed and not so tensed up, your body does open up a lot quicker. Though my second birth, man, I was like tensing up. I was grabbing everything. I was like in this like flight or fight mode, and I still gave birth really quickly. I think it's just your body. Your body just knows what to do. And sometimes people naturally labor for longer. Some people just can give birth on the go. Do I have any tips for mamas out there who are preparing for birth? I've got plenty of tips, but the main tips I would say is to like have a birth plan, but also be flexible because things can change and every birth is different. So have an idea of what you want, and also like have a supportive birth team that can advocate for you, because in those moments where you're going through your surges, and if you have someone there just speaking up for you, it helps like so much more just to know that you've got people on your side. And sometimes, yes, you trust your doctor and the nurses, but having your partner or your doula know exactly what you want makes a world of difference. If you're planning to have an unmedicated birth, a lot of prep is required before that. Like I did a lot of like meditations, birth affirmations. I stretched down there with a thing called an epidural. So there's a lot of preparation needed mentally and physically to have the most uncomplicated birth possible. So I feel like you need to be mentally prepared and just set aside some time so you can get into that state of mind. And I think the biggest tip of all is that every birth is going to be different. I mean, even my first and second, right? This is a tip that I'm like telling myself, like, is to like not really compare and get so bummed about not having it go exactly to plan. You know, like that's a big thing that I'm trying to work on right now, just letting it go and just enjoy being with baby. The most important thing is just to trust your body, listen to your body, do what you feel that's right. That's all I'm going to cover today, but if you have more questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Go watch my birth vlogs if you haven't already. Also, please make sure you subscribe to my channel. It will help this mama out a lot. That is it from me. I shall speak to you guys next time. Bye!